Hey students, it's Miss Wicks. I am coming to you today to talk about the 30 Years' War. I wanted to just share that this is one of the pivotal events in European history. I wanted to reassure you as well that I've made every attempt to try to streamline it as much as possible because this is a long war. There's a lot of people involved. There's 4 different phases. And so today I'm just going to share with you kind of a survey view of the 30 Years' War, which took place from 1618 to 1648. And this is really seen as like the culmination of the war's of religion. So it is quite pivotal. And this is also going to be coupled with instructions on our first DBQ. This topic was actually the topic for the DBQ on the 2018 AP European History exam, which I was able to help grade. I was very excited to get some of that experience there. But the 30 Years' War is going to be our topic today. It's a pivotal event, and a lot of historians almost see it as kind of like a precursor to a world war, because this war involved most of Europe at some point. Maybe not continuously, but at some point, most European powers were involved, and many of the ones who were not involved weren't involved because they had their own domestic struggles happening at the same time. The other thing I wanted to mention here real quick, the little symbol you see on the side is an emblem from a band called Sabaton. Their Careless Rex album is all about the 30 Years' War. They're a European band, and all of their music, all their lyrics is about, it features historical content, especially if you're into military history, if you're into looking at the world wars. Their lyrics are amazing, and they actually have history content that they share. So they actually do historical research before they start writing their music, and it's enjoyable. They're one of my favorites. So our goal today is to prepare to write our first DBQ of the entire year. I'm going to also share that DBQs, or document-based question as it's also called, is a very important part of your AP test. It's about a quarter of the score for your AP exam. So this is really going to be like the bedrock of all of our writing that we do this year. And the big difference between a DBQ and an LEQ is that with a DBQ, they're going to give you some documents so that you have a place to start from. So they're going to provide you with some evidence, and then you're going to be rewarded if you add anything on top of that. So if you have extra knowledge, extra information, that's also awarded in the rubric. And the difference between this and like an LEQ or a long essay question, LEQs are usually shorter because they don't provide you with that evidence. So you really have to rely upon your own historical knowledge. But the beauty of an LEQ is that you have a choice between 3 different questions, whereas on a DBQ, you have to write the one they give you. So on our AP test, we have 3 writing tasks and a multiple choice section. So you've got multiple choice, then your SAQs. So the little SAQs are usually, 10 minutes a piece. You've got 3 of those. Then you'll have your 10-minute break, and then you'll come back in the test room for part 2. And so you'll write your DBQ and your LEQ, and then you're finished with the test. So a DBQ, the one that we're going to be focusing on for today, is from 2018. We are going to evaluate whether the 30 Years' War was fought primarily for religious or primarily for political reasons, or do we think it was some combination of both? So today, as we're going through everything, just kind of keep that question in mind, and we are going to return to it here in a few minutes. So today, if we were taking notes in my physical classroom, we would highlight all of the areas controlled by the Habsburg families. So I'm just going to remind you of our previous story. Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor when Martin Luther was starting the Protestant Reformation, he decided at the end of his reign, he was tired, he was over it. What he did before he retired is he split the Habsburg Empire into 2 sections. So his son, Philip II, got the Spanish Habsburg territories that you see there in the orange, and his brother received all of the Austrian Habsburg territories that you see here in the yellow. So really, if we're going to compare, Philip got the better half because the Spanish Habsburgs controlled all of those colonies in the New World. But what we're going to see is that the Austrian Habsburg family is in charge of that area of Europe all the way up until World War I. So they do keep their power. And what we do know is that the Habsburgs like to intermarry with each other to keep the power in the family. So they do control a lot of territory. What we're going to see also is that when the Reformation happens, the Spanish Habsburgs and the Austrian Habsburgs really want to try to minimize the spread of Protestantism. They do not like Martin Luther. They did not like that peasant revolt, So the Peace of Augsburg at the end of the German peasant revolt is going to allow the German princes to decide for their people if they're going to be Lutheran or Catholic. It is not freedom of religion. It's your choice. You pick one or the other, but your leader picks for you. So if you lived in a town and you wanted to be Lutheran, but your leader decided to become Catholic, then you needed to move. And what we tend to see is that much of what we call today Northern Germany, that area decides to become Lutheran, and much of today what is like Bavaria in Southern Germany, that is going to become Catholic. I'm also going to call Germany, Germany for the sake of simplicity today, but throughout this course, keep in mind that Germany does not unify until the late 1800s with Otto von Bismarck and that whole process. So today I'm going to make some references to Germany, but just kind of keep in mind that Germany is not quite there yet as far as being a unified country, okay? So the problem here is that here's your religious map. So again, this area is kind of nominally ruled to some degree by the Austrian Habsburgs, but you've got a lot of pockets of different types of Protestants. And remember, not everybody who's Protestant is Lutheran. You've got Calvinists, you've got some Anabaptists in there. Everyone dislikes the Anabaptists because they believe in a separation of church and state. So again, if you're the Austrian Habsburg king, if you're Ferdinand II, you see this as a problem, and your goal in life is, as far as we look at the Habsburgs, their goal is to return Europe to Catholicism as much as possible. So, characteristics of the 30 Years' War. Remember, our big picture question that we're working towards today is the 30 Years' War a political conflict or a religious conflict? Or is it some combination of both? And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you can argue all of those sides very well. And you'll see that with the evidence that we give you here in a few minutes once we look at the documents. So what is going on with the 30 Years' War? The Holy Roman Empire, which is the territory of the Austrian Habsburg king, that's the battleground. So this is not all happening in Bavaria. This is not all happening around Prague. This is happening in parts around Europe. At the beginning of the war, it's the Catholics versus the Protestants. The Catholic king is trying to force Catholicism upon his Protestant subjects, and they don't appreciate it. By the end of the 30 Years' War, however, it's the Habsburgs versus everybody else. So we're going to see that a lot of countries get involved in the war, not just for religious reasons necessarily, but because they want to take a pound of flesh from the Habsburgs. Even if they're fellow Catholic countries, like France, for example, they see this as like a prime opportunity to take a run at the Habsburgs and try to, hey, the house is on fire, let me go ahead and steal the TV, so to speak. And then that's very much like the dine and dash kind of mentality that some of the other leaders had. So keep that in mind, that people are going to get involved. And this is a much bigger situation than it really had to be. So I mentioned earlier that there are 4 phases of this war. Miss Wicks is not trying to get too detailed with this today. I'm going to give you guys the highlights here. But phase 1 is your Bohemian phase. The Austrian Habsburg king, Ferdinand II, is Catholic. He inherits Bohemia, and the Bohemians hate him because they're Protestant. And Ferdinand starts making moves to try to Catholicize the Protestants. He sent some priests to their town. He's really, really trying to put the pressure on to force the city to become Catholic, or to force the area to become Catholic, and they're not having it. So in May of 1618, this is kind of the moment that starts the whole conflict. There's a moment called the defenestration of Prague. So the word defenestration sounds very sinister, but what it means is to throw something out the window. So what they decided to do with this Catholic minister, this priest who had shown up to try to have an influence in town, they actually physically, bodily picked him up and threw him out the window. Fortunately for the priest, he landed in a dung pile. His pride was injured, but he wasn't physically harmed, But word got back to the king, and this is a problem. And in the meantime, Bohemia tried to rebel. They tried to have their own king, and that didn't last for very long because Ferdinand is coming to town, and he's incensed. He's coming with his army. So my goofy meme here. Sorry about that. Okay. So the Bohemian phase, again, this is kind of starting over here in this kingdom of Bohemia. Ferdinand II is the Holy Roman Emperor, which is actually an elected position, but it tended to go to the Habsburgs. The Pope kind of decides who the best child is, and it was the Habsburgs here in this case. And so he is incensed. This emperor decides to call up his cousin, Philip III of Spain, and ends up really creating this big army. But while the Bohemians have rebelled and they have their own king, this inspires other parts of Austria to rebel against the king. So what should have been like a regional conflict becomes much bigger very fast. The Danish phase of the war is part two. What we're going to find is that this is where the other countries start to kind of show up to the party to see what they can take. Protestant Denmark helped Bohemia, and yes, it's Protestants helping Protestants, but also their hope is to get some of the Habsburg territories in Germany. They want to pick up some land. So Ferdinand II decides to try to end all resistance. He tried to crush all the Protestant fires that were popping up. He appointed his buddy Ulrich von Wallenstein. Sorry, I'm Texan. I'm terrible with this pronunciation. We're going to go with it, though. And so Wallenstein defeated all the Protestants to the north, but later Ferdinand II had Wallenstein assassinated because he was paranoid that Wallenstein was partnering up with his political enemies. So there you go. But again, I wanted to just kind of mention, recently I read a book called The Hangman's Daughter, and it's set in this region about 20 years after the conclusion of the 30 Years' War. And in the book, the city is still very much trying to recover from the 30 Years' War. Everyone is talking about relatives who had died. Hey, we're rebuilding the mill because the mill was pulled down during the war. And again, a wonderful book. It's a bit dark in places because it's a murder mystery, but it really shows you how the common people suffered for a long time, for decades after the 30 Years' War. This really was so much more destructive than it had to be. Okay, so eventually Wallenstein is fired, and then later he is assassinated. The Swedish phase, this is where our Sabaton album pops up. They are huge fans of your boy Gustavus Adolphus. Gustavus Adolphus is the king of Sweden, and he is trying to step into the war because he wants to stop Habsburg power. So he is a Protestant leader. Sweden's going to go ahead and take the reins on this. And this is also when the French start popping in. And this is interesting because France at that time is still largely Catholic. Yes, they had passed the Edict of Nantes, which says we have to give political rights to the Protestant Huguenots. However, much of France was still Catholic. So it's interesting that you've got this very Catholic country of France who is fighting against another Catholic country. And when we look in the documents here in a few minutes with the DBQ, you're going to see that the ministers in France hop into the war because they were worried about the Habsburg political power. So it didn't matter to the French that they were, in agreement on religion. They were more concerned about the political side. They were worried. And if we look at the map, you'll see that a lot of France's border is encircled by the Habsburgs, whether they were Spanish Habsburgs or Austrian Habsburgs. France really feels like the Habsburgs are pushing into their lane and they want to push them back. So what we're going to see is that Gustavus Adolphus has several wonderful military victories, and eventually dies. But what we're going to see here, a little info about Gustavus. Okay, but your Swedish phase again is kind of pushing the Habsburgs back. So the French phase really kicks off after the death of Gustavus Adolphus. This is where Sweden and France kind of switch roles. And now at this point, most of Europe is involved in some form or fashion. As I mentioned earlier, the people who didn't get involved, in many cases, it was because they had their own domestic drama happening. But this is really seen as kind of a precursor of a world war, not a World War I necessarily, but it ends up involving most people. And this phase is the most destructive. This final phase is going to really kind of be settled in today what is southern Germany. The German towns are destroyed. And I really just want to reiterate that war atrocities were committed by both sides. You've got terrible stories of barns being pulled down, people burned in their houses, children being killed, worse things than, there's really, really dark stuff there that's in some of the primary source stuff we'll read shortly. But I also wanted to mention how this is happening in Central Europe. Think about economics for a second. Agriculture is going to collapse because this huge world war is happening in the middle of, Europe. We can't get products to market. We can't safely take goods to town because there's battles happening and armies all over the place. So this was very destructive for the economy of the 1600s. 8 million people are going to die in this war, and it's a third of the population. So this is a huge, huge, huge decimator of population. I just really want to reiterate, even though most of the deaths are settled in Germany, this is really going to cripple the economy of all of Europe. And the countries that are not as affected are the ones who took a step back, who didn't get quite as involved. This is a painting showing a group of soldiers just going crazy, going and plundering a German village. And again, too, today we have very strict rules for military. You can be court-martialed, you can be in prisons. We have shows about that, right? NCIS, right? But they didn't have that kind of restriction in this situation. These guys are just doing what they want. And it was really, really sad how the people suffered. There was a lot of casualties as far as the civilians are concerned. This is a document from the Spielvogel book, and it is a primary source. So Jacob, the writer here, is writing his own recollections. And as you read through it, if you guys want to pause the video, just take a few minutes there and read through it. He's describing how the soldiers have attacked his family, and he's overheard the gang rape of his family members. He's hearing the soldiers attack his sister, and it's just heartbreaking. And this is a primary source. He was there. He's writing about something he witnessed. This is not a novel that another writer created. It's tough. Loss of lives. I just wanted to show you again. I think when we talk about war, it can get very easy for us to be distant from numbers. Thousands died. Okay, it's a number, right? But when you see this kind of map, it takes on a different significance. The areas in red lost over half of their population. The areas in the dark green lost up to 40%. I mean, this is significant, and it's going to take several centuries for Germany to have a population rebound to what it was before. So where we get to the Peace of Westphalia, this is 1648, yay. So this is the agreement that will end the 30 Years' War. So the ruler of each state can determine its official religion, but, except in the Habsburg lands, you must permit private worship. Okay? So, in other words, with the Peace of Westphalia, yes, we can still be a Catholic country, but unless you're a Habsburg or you live in a Habsburg territory, if somebody wants to be a different religion, you have to allow them to practice their religion in their own home. So again, they may not have, giant churches, but they still have some privacy to practice their faith at home. And we're not knocking on doors. We're not going to go find the priest's hole anymore. They actually in England used to have little hidden closets. So if they had mass being said at home, and the authorities came to search the house, they could hide the priest in this little closet that was called a priest hole. And so, I mean, again, they weren't used to the freedom of religion the way we are used to it today. So the Peace of Westphalia will acknowledge that Calvinism is a major religion. It's giving some independence. It's giving some land rights to different groups. France is going to acquire the Alsace region, which is going to become a huge part of World War I and World War II. The Alsace-Lorraine region borders France and what becomes Germany, and it's very rich in natural resources. They've got coal mines. It's a beautiful area, and again, for hundreds of years, the French and the Germans have fought about who owns that territory, and it's settled by French and German people. So again, in this war, the French are going to get this territory, and that will be something that comes up later. This is also saying the Pope cannot participate in the German affairs, so it's further clipping the Pope's political power. And again, just giving acknowledgement to the Protestants that they have political powers, that they are a legitimate group. So everybody hates the Peace of Westphalia, but they're finally happy that the war is over. So it's the end of the war. Well, is it? And I say, the question mark here because many of the countries feel like the Peace of Westphalia was unfair to them. They're going to be kind of nursing their grievances going forward. Okay, so all that being said, now we're going to start talking about the DBQ. And I'm going to take a little drink of my water here. Okay. All right, so the prompts for today is to evaluate whether the 30 Years' War was fought primarily for religious or political reasons. So you can argue one side or the other, or you can argue both sides. It's up to you. So in a DBQ, what we're going to do is read over the documents that I'll show you here in just a minute, and we're going to write an essay. DBQ essays are typically between 3 and 6 pages. When you're writing DBQs, there's no set, it's got to be a minimum of 500 words. I've read wonderful DBQs that are shorter. I've read terrible DBQs that are longer. It is all about how you use your evidence and explain and defend your points. So what we're going to do in the DBQ essay is respond to the prompts with a defensible thesis or a claim. So we're taking a stand. In the thesis statement, you're telling us whether you think it's a religious cause or a political cause or some combination of both, and you're going to tell us why. So you're telling us what kind of argument your paper will make. In that first paragraph, you're also going to describe the broader historical context that's relevant to the prompt. Now, contextualization or context can get a little bit tricky. In most cases, the way that students write this successfully in almost all the papers I read for the AP reading, most students will talk about the backstory, okay? So for this essay, you could talk about the background of the Habsburgs and why they split up, or you could talk about the Reformation and the German peasants' revolts and how it caused tensions. Again, in AP Euro, I would try to make sure that your contextualization is as recent as possible, okay? So in AP Euro land, we're not going to say from the dawn of time or, oh, Julius Caesar, nothing like that. We're going to want to make sure in AP Euro land that we're seating this contextualization within 50 to 75 years of this question. So what has immediately preceded the 30 Years' War that will give us some insight into how we arrived at this situation, okay? And contextualization is the bigger picture. So I have read contextualization where people talk about what comes next, and it can work, but in most cases, when it's successfully used, the student is talking about the backstory. Why is it that these people have beef? What just happened? So in the body paragraphs of this essay, and this can be a 5-paragraph essay, Ms. Wicks is not telling you how short or long this has to be, but we need to use at least 6 of the 7 documents. I will always tell my students to use all the documents because we're human. Sometimes we misinterpret a document. Mistakes happen, things happen, we're human. And so if you use all 7 documents, you give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. We have some freedom here. I feel better. I will always tell my students to use all the documents. So the thing here is that we have to use these documents to support an argument. So if I'm reading a speech, I'm not just saying, oh, so-and-so gave a speech, but I'm using the content of that speech to support my argument. So this speech shows that this is a political cause of the 30 Years' War. So I'm using that document. I'm not just telling you what it says, but I'm using it to support an argument that I'm building. For at least 3 of your 7 documents, this is where we're going to talk about CAP. This is your document analysis point, or your sourcing point, as we like to call it at the reading. This is where we're going to get a little bit deeper. So think about yourself as being like the armchair psychologist. There's a couple of ways you can do this. Some teachers talk about HIPPO. Some teachers talk about point of view. I like the CAP acronym with my students. CAP stands for context, audience, or purpose or point of view. So CAP, like Captain America, right? So you can talk about the backstory. Why is this person giving a speech? You can talk about what they're trying to achieve with the attended audience. If Mary Queen of Scots is giving a speech on the scaffold right before her execution, she's probably trying to curry some sympathy, or she's trying to cement her legacy. And she's not going to come out and say that. We have to be the psychologist here and kind of read into what she's saying. This is also where the sourcing line can give us a lot of hints. So if we know that this is a Catholic priest, if we know that this is a persecuted Protestant, that's going to give us some hints right there. So we can use that sourcing information that we get with the document to help build that CAP statement. Point of view is the why behind the why. If a celebrity is going on an evening talk show because they have a movie coming out, they're not only going to be on the show because they're promoting their film, but they're not going to come out and say that. If we have a political candidate making an appearance at the state fair, they're not telling us that they're only there for clouds. We have to read into that. So that's where you get a little more psychological with it with point of view. What is the hidden agenda? What's the hidden purpose behind what this person is doing? So again, for 3 of your 7 documents, this is where you're getting a little bit deeper. So you're not just telling us what they're saying, but you're telling us why they're saying it, or what they're hoping to achieve by saying it, or what in the historical situation has compelled them to have this view. And again, you're going to pick up some good points for that. And then we're going to use the evidence to, we're going to pick up some points in the rubric for supporting the argument very well, using outside information, and also, using those documents, just crafting a really nuanced essay. So I like the DBQ rubric because there's some extra points kind of hidden in there for really good writers. Okay, so document 1, I'm just going to kind of speed through these here real quick. And then attached in the assignment, you guys are going to be able to pull up your own copy of these documents. And again, if you want to print it, you can highlight it. You can save it as a PDF and edit it. Do your thing. But here are your 7 documents. So document number 1 is Holy Roman Emperor Matthias, and he is writing an open letter to his Protestant subjects in Bohemia. Consider, and I'm not trying to give this all away, an open letter. Okay, so what is the difference between an open public statement, an open letter that I post on my Facebook for everyone to see, versus somebody sliding into your DMs? Okay, there's difference there, right? So again, consider some of that as you guys read through the documents. That may be a hint for you. Document number 2, these are selections from the Constitution of the Protestant Bohemian Federation, which is a group of the nobles of the city, coalition of, the business leaders, the nobles. And so they're saying what they hope their new government will do. This is a public document, everyone can read it. So we want to consider that. Document number 3 is a Jesuit official writing a report to the elector of Bavaria, so the political leader of Bavaria, on the efforts to re-Catholicize previously Protestant areas after the Catholic victory in battle in that region. Okay, so consider who's writing that letter to who, and is this a public letter or is this a private letter? Okay, so kind of, addressing it in that regard. Sometimes in a private communique, if it's a text message to, my mom, I might be a little more candid. So consider some of that, and also consider their relationship with each other. What are their jobs? So you can really get a lot of information from the source line there. Document number 4, our boy Gustavus Adolphus, who we just heard about. He's writing a letter to the Protestant elector of Brandenburg. So it's a Protestant king writing to another Protestant king. What's he saying here? Okay. Document number 5. This is a secret account. All right, it's supposed to be quiet. We're supposed to be private here. But this is a confidential account of the meeting between the Swedish High Chancellor and Sweden's ally after the great King Gustavus Adolphus has died. So again, consider some of that. Let's read the document and see what they say. Document number 6. There will always be one of the 7 documents that has some kind of a visual. So here we have a woodcut, which is kind of like a really fancy stamp. It's a woodcut stamp that they, have made here. And this is Cardinal Richelieu, who is the French Catholic minister of France. He's the king's right-hand man. We want to definitely read the source line here. I will say at the reading, this was the document that students had the most trouble with, but in most cases it was because they did not read through that source line. So be sure you're not just looking at the picture, but you read between the lines here. And, again, we're trying to argue whether he's involved because of politics or involved because of religion. And the last document here, this is the Pope having a public declaration in response to the Treaty of Westphalia. So what is the Pope's perspective here? We know that most people are not very happy about the Peace of Westphalia. They're not into the agreements that were made, so we want to hear from the Pope here. All right, so before we end, I want to show you guys the official rubric. So, and I will include this in the assignments so you can pull this up for yourself. The DBQ rubric, by the way, this is the same for all of your AP History classes. So if you have AP World History, if you have AP US History, the same rubric applies for all three of these courses. So if you had one of those other courses and you were able to master thesis writing in that course, please bring those same skills over. You don't have to relearn how to ride the bike in this case. So you're going to get a point for having a thesis statement that establishes an argument, okay? You are not going to rephrase the prompt, but you're going to share what position you're taking, and you're also going to give us a preview of the argument you're making, okay? So you can say, hey, I think it was for political reasons because X, Y, and Z, okay? If I just say, hey, I think the 30 Years' War was caused by political reasons, I'm not going to get the point because I'm not telling you what my evidence will be, okay? Contextualization. Remember, thesis and contextualization usually both go in that same paragraph, okay? Contextualization most naturally goes in the opener, okay? Contextualization is giving us that backstory. So in AP Euroland, this is going to be 50 to 75 years before this prompt. What is happening immediately before this war that is causing the situation? What's the backstory? We're looking at people subtweeting each other. Sometimes you need to know the context to know why they're being shady. And the same thing here with political leaders too. In part C, which is evidence, there are a lot of ways to get points here. So we're going to pick up 1 point if we use at least 3 documents successfully. That should be pretty easy. We're also going to pick up a 2nd point when we use at least 6 documents to support an argument. So again, this is not just, oh, Cardinal Richelieu said, or oh, the Pope is saying, but you need to tell us a little bit more. So I'm not just giving you the laundry list of the documents, but I'm using those documents to support my point. And then you're also going to pick up a 3rd point for evidence beyond the documents. So this is anything else that you know about the 30 Years' War that was not specifically in those 7 documents. So anything else, any people, any events, any facts, this is your time to shine. Any extra info you have, is going to get you that extra point. D, analysis and reasoning. This point right here is for at least 3 of the documents, you're providing us extra information on sourcing. So this is that cap detail I talked about earlier. You're telling us about their purpose. You're telling us what they're trying to compel the audience to do. You're telling us their point of view. You're telling us why they're making this speech. So again, it's got to be relevant to the argument, but this is where we're going to get a little bit deeper. Okay, and then the last point, sometimes we refer to it as the unicorn point, but this is awarding you for having a really well-supported, nuanced essay. So for that student who's talking about, change over time, or what stayed the same over time, multiple causes, this is a student who's giving us a really insightful essay. They're proving their point with multiple perspectives and multiple pieces of evidence. So this is the point for the 5 student that really has mastered this and they've got it locked down. Okay. All right, so feel free to email me. I'm at ewicks@Conroe-ISD. If you guys have any questions, if you get stuck, Google, okay? Guys, this is our first DBQ for this course. It is normal to be confused at first. If you pull up, 30 Years' War DBQ, you will see some of the student samples that College Board released. You can also pull up the scoring notes or the scoring guidelines that we used at the AP reading. I don't mind telling you guys the stuff is out there because this is our first DBQ, okay? And it's natural to feel, a little bit nervous or overwhelmed the first time you do it. But again, just remember, we're taking a stand. Is this a political or a religious cause to the 30 Years' War? And we're supporting our point with the documents given. So you can do this. If you have any questions, please, please, please contact me, reach out, email me, and you've got this. Thank you.